Hello and welcome back to Season 5 of the MRX Lab podcast, the show from FlexMR, where this year we're on a mission to uncover the many ways market research connects with the world around us and learn how to navigate a fast-changing business landscape. I'm very excited today to be joined by Billy Budd, Customer Insight Specialist at Coventry Building Society, to talk about the impact of AI on client-side research teams. Billy, welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, I'm really excited for today's conversation. But before we do jump into the topic, which I know is going to be of great interest to many of our listeners, it would be great if you could share just a brief introduction to your journey through the research industry and what you currently do.
Certainly can do that. So I have been working within research for the last 4 or 5 years. So I guess I'm fairly new to it. But it wasn't always kind of the plan. But it's an industry that I'm really grateful that I do work in now because I really enjoy it. So in my 5 years, I've always been at Coventry Building Society. I think from what I understand, as this is the only kind of client side or the only research team that I've worked for and with, I'm quite fortunate in as a client side researcher that I'm able to kind of dip my toes in lots of different types of research. So I've done quant, focus groups, user testing, all that sort of stuff. So I've had kind of experience and exposure to lots of different things in a fairly short period of time. Yeah, that's me.
Great. And I'm going to go completely off script for a moment already, so apologies in advance. But you mentioned there that this isn't a path that you thought you would kind of be in, but you're enjoying it now, and I think that's a really common story across the industry. The almost cliche, I fell into research. What would you say to people considering working in research? What is it that is good that you've enjoyed about these kind of 4 years?
I have a very inquisitive mind. I will often, daily, multiple times a day, find myself saying, why? I'll read something or see something or hear something and I'll say, why? I think doing this kind of work answers a lot of questions that you have. You find solutions, you find meaning in the work that you do, and I think that's what I enjoy the most, is the reward and the satisfaction from being able to answer not just my questions but stakeholders' questions. If somebody comes to me with a problem, if I don't already know the answer, I'm able to help them understand what the answer is, and that's probably the most, or one of the most rewarding and enjoyable elements for me. So if you enjoy learning why, being able to answer questions, be able to give kind of meaningful direction and insight, then do it because you'll enjoy it.
That's great. I really like that. And so the question we're here to talk about today is around AI. And so let's see if we can get to some hopefully meaningful, interesting answers around AI and its impact on research and specifically client-side teams, because we know agencies are adopting, pushing. There's a lot of talk around AI in the agency sphere, but I think it's also really interesting to hear from a client-side perspective what impact that's having and what that means for you. So I guess to start off, from your point of view, what are some of the key opportunities that AI offers?
I think at a kind of overall level, before we go into the kind of specific details, as a client-side research team, it gives us the ability to be able to do more in-house. I think it's also important just to say, I'm not saying that either now or eventually it would replace agencies because we have the capabilities to do everything, because that's not the case. I don't think that that's the case. But it does give us the ability to do more in-house, and to do different things in-house that wouldn't necessarily or haven't necessarily always been available. It gives us more tools in our toolkit to get to those kind of meaningful answers in less time, and sometimes at a fraction of the cost of what it would have typically taken to be able to do that. I think some of the biggest opportunities are around data analysis. So being able to do more quickly with the data that you have. Predictive analysis. So being able to kind of help the business forecast and understand or predict what the future's going to look like. Kind of more generally improving efficiency. So where if we take something like manual coding, which I'll probably talk about a bit later, you've got a team of people doing that over an extended period of time, whereas AI can kind of improve the efficiency of that. It can code in real time. It can code with a consistent level of accuracy. I think those are probably the ability to analyze, to forecast, and efficiencies are probably the biggest things, biggest opportunities.
It's really interesting as well that you mentioned the coding opportunity, because a couple of years back we ran an experiment at IIS called Man versus Machine, and this was before the big generative AI boom. But we took one of our lead insight managers, and we gave her a set of unstructured qualitative data, and we gave the same data set to an early version of an AI tool, and compared the results, and also did a version in which the machine coding was then treated a second time by a human. And as I'm sure you can probably guess by the direction of this anecdote, the results were that the AI analysis was the quickest, the human analysis was the most detailed, and the hybrid had this really great blend of the two. It was reasonably fast and with a good degree of accuracy and a good degree of depth. And I think that's kind of some of the direction that we're talking about here as well, isn't it? That we're blending those two things.
Absolutely. Everything I've looked at is tools to support our team, to enhance what we do, to complement what we do. That is the best combination, is the hybrid approach. And I think a bit, if there's time, because I've probably got a lot to say, but if there's time, I can talk about one tool in particular and kind of demonstrate why there is a need for a hybrid approach.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to that point, but just before we do, you mentioned then about testing tools, and I know before we started recording, you mentioned you've been testing a lot of AI tools over the past couple of months. So I'm really curious, kind of as a general level, what have some of your learnings been from that? And what does that evaluation look like? What do you hope to find in a tool?
I think there are a number of important steps you have to take when you are assessing AI tools. One of them, which actually before I kind of started this journey of looking at all these different types of tools, I hadn't really considered, which is quite important, is It's usability. So often, if you've never looked at any of these tools, you might just think, oh, okay, it does X, Y, and Z for me. But often they're built in around with dashboards and that kind of stuff. So that's really, really important. I've seen a kind of big variety in the usability of these AI tools. I think that's really important, that when people are looking at this, they consider it. So, oh, wow, okay, this is amazing. This does X, Y, and Z. But kind of think more practically, right? How easy is it for me to use? How easy is it for my team to use? What's also important is the ability or the scope of the tool. So when looking at a tool, I think it's important to say, obviously, if you have an objective, does this tool do what I need to do? But a kind of secondary question I've started to ask myself is, what's the scope for the future? Let's talk to the people who have built this, who are developing this. What's coming in the future? What else am I going to be able to do with this tool in the future? And then I guess you've got the kind of standard things that you might look for. So what's the accuracy of this tool? One of the tools we've got is AI generated visual heat maps. So it's and here we're trying to we wanted to understand, what is the accuracy? If you put this visual stimulus through this AI tool that generates this kind of visual heat map, versus an actual study, like where does it sit? How close is it to replicating the real experience? This one's actually 90%. So it's you need to understand, okay, this looks good, but tell me, show me, give me evidence. What is the accuracy of this tool? That's really, really important. And I'd hope any kind of legitimate supplier would be able to articulate and evidence that. I think cost as well. Cost is really hard because there's not a lot of comparability. You can only go off what, if you have a demo with 4 or 5 suppliers, you can only go off what they're telling you. But it's really important that you do think about cost and does it make sense? It is a nice shiny new tool, but does the value equal what you're getting? Is it worth that investment?
So I think one of the I just want to jump back a little bit to, you mentioned usability there, and I think that's really interesting because one of the things that's been on my mind a lot recently are these kind of technology investments, which are really, from a client side point of view, they are technology investments, but they're more than that as well. They require behavioral change. They require people to think about things differently. And when you've got a team, that usability element is really important in, are my team actually going to use this? Is it going to affect the way we're behaving? Is it going to change something about our process? Or is it just going to sit there? I think, usability is a really important part of that, and realistic application as well, understanding how it's going to interface and how big of a behavioral change is it as well. And as an organization, your appetite for that. So I think there's some really interesting things in your kind of evaluation there around not just the tool itself, but how it maps onto your business as well, and your teams, and even down to the level of individuals. Are we going to adopt this? Are we going to change something about what we're doing?
I completely agree. If your team, if your stakeholders don't, I guess that's probably another point as well. I've probably got a list as long as my arm if you've got 4 hours. But yeah, that is a very fair point as well. It is about educating your team and your stakeholders if they're going to be not even necessarily so stakeholders, even if they're not going to use the tool, but potentially benefit from the output of the tool. It is about educating and making sure that your team and your stakeholders understand, look, this tool is legitimate. Here is the evidence. Here is what it does. Here are the endorsements. It does work. You can trust whatever the output is from this tool. So that's really important.
So from suppliers of technology and AI, what are kind of the key things you're looking for from them?
Probably goes back a bit to what I said about accuracy, but honesty, openness, transparency, what's the accuracy of whichever model you're using? Is it a model you've built yourself or bought from somebody else and kind of enhanced or changed yourself? What support and training do you offer, not just for me, but for my team, if they're using it? Track record. So how long have you been in this space? How long have you been doing what you're doing? Where are you getting the data from that you've trained your model on? Things like, so particularly with the eye tracking model that we looked at, or the eye tracking tools that we looked at, a lot of them had various kind of endorsements from some kind of well-known universities or institutes. So any endorsements like that are useful to look at and understand as well. And I assume this is relevant for everyone, but it's particularly relevant for us, is security and privacy. So obviously, if the tool, the model that you're using is taking my data from the members that are part of my organization, how is it being stored? How is it being used? Where is it going? Is the model I'm using ring fenced? Is the data I'm giving it being used to train your kind of overall general model? It's those sorts of things, just about making sure the way I'm using it is secure and private.
And then I assume also that there's an element of, like you mentioned earlier, that understanding the future direction of any tool as well. I know in some of the large language generative AI models, after big updates, there have been really large inconsistencies in the accuracy, validity. So you're going to want some reassurance there that, the tool has this degree of accuracy now, and it's going to maintain that level of accuracy. And any new updates to that model are tested before they're kind of put live.
Absolutely. Definitely. I completely agree.
So I'm sure there's a lot of people kind of exploring, trying to navigate this really fast growing AI landscape right now. What is your advice to them?
There's probably a few pieces of advice. I think in order to be able to use AI tools or to even start exploring them, you have to have buy-in from, whether it's your team, your manager, the business. You need support. You need to be able to go into this knowing that if you find a tool or a service that works for you, you're actually able to have it, to use it, to get it. And that requires kind of buy-in and cooperation from colleagues. If I guess if you find that you're in a position where you don't have buy-in, do some research, learn about it, try and educate your colleagues and kind of help them understand and articulate the benefits. Get that buy-in, because that's really important. Otherwise, it all kind of falls down. once you're in a position where kind of your manager or your team is endorsing what you're doing and saying, look, this is really interesting, start small. Don't kind of start at, we're going to get this giant AI tool and it's going to integrate with all of our systems and give us a massive increase on ROI or something like that. Start small. Start small where there is a kind of, there will be a noticeable, tangible benefit, but it's also manageable for you to kind of research and do yourself and kind of take it on that journey. So for us, it was the AI tracking tool. It's a tool that really the benefits are reaped by the kind of wider teams around us, but it's a tool that only we use in the research team. So it's a tool that we've kind of set up and got going. In the grand scheme of things, fairly cheap. So kind of minimal risk or impact if something doesn't work out. Obviously, you're doing your due diligence anyway, like we've already discussed. But it's just to start small. You need to work with this. This is possibly a kind of standard process for most organizations anyway, but work with your IT team, work with your information security team, work with procurement, make sure if they don't want to be brought on the journey with you, make sure they're aware of what you're doing and what's going on, because it would be incredibly disappointing if you got it all the way to a point where you were ready to kind of onboard a supplier, information security come in and say, no, sorry, that's not going to work because of X, Y, and Z. So it's collaborate with those departments. Like we said before as well, just keep up to date. Go to conferences, read articles, follow those kind of news sites, talk in forums. Just keep up to date. Because it is really, I know everybody says it's probably really cliche, but it is such a fast moving thing at the moment. So keep up to date. That's going to kind of bring out potentially new opportunities for you as well. And like I said, with cost, just think about the value. I know it's not necessarily always kind of monetary value, but what value does it bring? How much of the business does it impact? And what can we do with whatever it's doing?
I really like your points there around buy-in and, understanding your team, understanding stakeholders, leadership, the culture of the organization. Had a great chat with Ian Stanfield 2 episodes ago from Specsavers, who was also kind of describing this challenge of this really often overlooked aspect of a researcher's job isn't just to find a supplier, do the research, but it's also to look inwards at the organization too. And every time you get a new member of the senior leadership team or a new person in a particular department that you work closely with, understanding them as well and how they're going to interact with the things that you're doing. And I think that's just a really important point to hammer home, that in all of these decisions, thinking just wider than the research opportunity or the way it impacts you as an individual, but the people around you in the organization as well.
100%. We in the grand scheme of things, whilst I would like to think a lot of what we do is important and kind of impactful, our team are a small cog in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, it's incredibly important that those other cogs are working with you and understand what you're doing and see the benefits as well. And I think it's particularly important because in my experience, a lot of people have kind of heard of AI and, you can say, oh, it does this thing. So they can kind of see the benefits and the output of it. but it's often the kind of the kind of skeptical bit is in the middle. It's like, right, well, how does it actually work though? Like, how are you putting this in and it's coming out here? And that's often the bit that's people need to understand, and unfortunately can be the hardest bit to articulate, because it is technical and complex, and there's big words like LLMs or neural networks and all that kind of stuff. So it's important that if you are finding yourself in a position where you have to articulate that because your stakeholders, those other cogs, need to understand how it gets from A to B, it's important probably that you have at least a basic understanding and you're able to talk about that sort of stuff.
To get beyond a little bit of the big black magic box of
exactly
AI.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, and I'm conscious we're just approaching the end of our time together. So before we go, what's the one thing you'd really like people to take away from today's episode?
Oh, that's a good question. And do your research, understand AI. If you're one of those skeptics, at least make an effort to be kind of informed, because I think you might find that if you make an effort to understand not just how it works, but what its kind of possibilities and capabilities are, I think it will change your thinking, it will change your outlook, it will change your ability to say what is and isn't possible.
And I suppose also on that note, AI is here, it is being used, it is going to change the research landscape, whatever your feelings are on it personally. So even from that point of view, it's something to understand, to be able to form an opinion on and see how it's going to impact the future.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And probably, sorry, I don't know if we're running out of time, but just to add to that, anyone who kind of follows AI or is mildly interested and reads or watches anything relating to AI, you'll have probably heard this, but it's very true, in my opinion. If you see an AI tool now doing what it's doing, producing whatever output it's producing, that's the worst it will ever be, because it's only going to get better. So I think we need to bear that in mind as well when we're looking at these tools.
Absolutely. Billy, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such an interesting conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me. I can't believe how fast that's gone.
It's surprising, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, thank you to everybody listening as well. We'll be back next month with another episode exploring the frontiers of market research and insight. But until then, I've been your host, Chris Martin, and this has been the MRX Lab.